Coraline by Neil Gaiman, Chapter 6. Coraline was woken by the mid-morning sun full on her face. For a moment she felt utterly dislocated. She did not know where she was. She was not entirely sure who she was. It is astonishing just how much of what we are can be tied to the beds we wake up in the morning, and it is astonishing how fragile that can be. Sometimes Coraline would forget who she was while she was daydreaming that she was exploring the Arctic, or the Amazon rainforest, or darkest Africa, and it was not until someone tapped her shoulder or said her name that Coraline would come back from 1,000,000 miles away with a start, and all in a fraction of a second have to remember who she was and what her name was, and that she was even there at all. Now there was sun on her face, and she was Coraline Jones. Yes, and then the green and pinkness of the room she was in, and the rustling of a large printed paper butterfly as it fluttered and beat its way about the building, told her where she had woken up. She climbed out of the bed. She could not wear her pajamas, dressing gown, and slippers during the day, she decided, even if it meant wearing the other Coraline's clothes. Was there another Coraline? No, she realized. There wasn't. There was just her. There were no regular clothes in the cupboard, though. They were more like dressing up clothes, or, she thought, the kind of clothes she would love to have hanging in her own wardrobe at home. There was a raggedy witch costume, a patched scarecrow costume, a future warrior costume with little digital lights in it that glittered and blinked, a slinky evening dress all covered in feathers and mirrors. Finally, in a drawer, she found a pair of black jeans that seemed to be made of velvet night, and a gray sweater the color of thick smoke, with faint and tiny stars in the fabric, which twinkled. She pulled on the jeans and the sweater. Then she put on a pair of bright orange boots she found at the bottom of the cupboard. She took her last apple out of the pocket of her dressing gown, and then took, from the same pocket, the stone with the hole in it. She put the stone into the pocket of her jeans, and it was as if her head had cleared a little, as if she had come out of some sort of a fog. She went into the kitchen, but it was deserted. Still, she was sure that there was someone in the flat. She walked down the hall until she reached her father's study and discovered that it was occupied. "Where's the other mother?" she asked the other father. He was sitting in the study at a desk which looked just like her father's, but he was not doing anything at all, not even reading gardening catalogs as her own father did when he was only pretending to be working. "Out," he told her, "fixing the doors. There are some vermin problems." He seemed pleased to have somebody to talk to. "The rats, you mean?" "No, the rats are our friends. This is the other kind. Big black fellow with his tail held high." "The cat, you mean?" "That's the one," said her other father. He looked less like her true father today. There was something slightly vague about his face, like bread dough that had begun to rise, smoothing out the bumps and cracks and depressions. Really, I mustn't talk to you when she's not here, he said. But don't you worry. She won't be gone often. I shall demonstrate our tender hospitality to you, such that you will not even think about ever going back. He closed his mouth and folded his hands in his lap. So what am I to do now? Asked Coraline. The other father pointed to his lips. Silence. If you won't even talk to me, said Coraline, I am going exploring. No point, said the other father. There isn't anywhere but here. This is all she made. The house, the grounds, and the people in the house. She made it, and she waited. Then he looked embarrassed, and he put one finger to his lips again, as if he had just said too much. Coraline walked out of his study. She went into the drawing room, over to the old door, and she pulled it, rattled it, and shook it. No, it was locked fast, and the other mother had the key. She looked around the room. It was so familiar. That was what made it feel so truly strange. Everything was exactly the same as she remembered. There was all her grandmother's strange-smelling furniture. There was the painting of the bowl of fruit, a bunch of grapes, 2 plums, a peach, and an apple, hanging on the wall. There was the low wooden table with the lion's feet, and the empty fireplace which seemed to suck heat from the room. But there was something else, something she did not remember seeing before. A ball of glass, up on the mantelpiece. She went over to the fireplace, went up on tiptoes, and lifted it down. It was a snow globe, with 2 little people in it. Coraline shook it and sent the snow flying, white snow that glittered as it tumbled through the water. Then she put the snow globe back on the mantelpiece and carried on looking for her true parents and for a way out. She went out of the flat, past the flashing lights door, behind which the other Mrs. ᵤ𝐻𝚑𝚴 performed their show forever, and then set off into the woods. Where Coraline came from, once you were through the patch of trees, you saw nothing but the meadow and the old tennis court. In this place, the woods went on farther, the trees becoming cruder and less tree-like the farther you went. Pretty soon they seemed very approximate, like the idea of trees, a grayish-brown trunk below, a greenish splodge of something that might have been leaves above. Coraline wondered if the other mother wasn't interested in trees, or if she just hadn't bothered with this bit properly, because nobody was expected to come out this far. She kept walking, and then the mist began. It was not damp, like a normal fog or mist. It was not cold, and it was not warm. It felt to Coraline like she was walking into nothing. I'm an explorer, thought Coraline to herself, and I need all the ways out of here that I can get. So I shall keep walking. The world she was walking through was a pale nothingness, like a blank sheet of paper or an enormous empty white room. It had no temperature, no smell, no texture, and no taste. It certainly isn't mist, thought Coraline, although she did not know what it was. For a moment, she wondered if she might not have gone blind. But no, she could see herself, plain as day. But there was no ground beneath her feet, just a misty, milky whiteness. "And what do you think you're doing?" said a shape to one side of her. It took a few moments for her eyes to focus on it properly. She thought it might be some kind of lion at first, some distance away from her. And then she thought it might be a mouse, close beside her. And then she knew what it was. "I am exploring," Coraline told the cat. Its fur stood straight out from its body, and its eyes were wide, while its tail was down and between its legs. It did not look a happy cat. "Bad place," said the cat, "if you want to call it a place, which I don't. What are you doing here?" "I'm exploring." "Nothing to find here," said the cat. "This is just the outside, the part of the place she hasn't bothered to create." "She?" "The one who says she's your other mother," said the cat. "What is she?" asked Coraline. The cat did not answer, just padded through the pale mist beside Coraline. A shape began to appear in front of them, something high and towering and dark. "You were wrong," she told the cat. "There is something there." And then it took shape in the mist, a dark house, which loomed at them out of the formless whiteness. "But that's," said Coraline. "The house you just left," agreed the cat. "Precisely." "Maybe I just got turned around in the mist," said Coraline. The cat curled the high tip of its tail into a question mark and dipped its head to one side. "You might have done," it said. "I certainly would not. Wrong indeed." "But how can you walk away from something and still come back to it?" "Easy," said the cat. "Think of somebody walking around the world. You start out walking away from something and end up coming back to it." "Small world," said Coraline. "It's big enough for her," said the cat. "Spiders' webs only have to be large enough to catch flies." Coraline shivered. "He said that she's fixing all the gates and the doors," she told the cat, "to keep you out." "She may try," said the cat, unimpressed. "Oh, yes, she may try." They were standing under a clump of trees now, beside the house. The trees looked much more likely. "There's ways in and ways out of this place that even she doesn't know about." "Did she make this place, then?" asked Coraline. "Made it, found it. What's the difference?" asked the cat. "Either way, she's had it a very long time. Hang on." And it gave a shiver and a leap. Before Coraline could blink, the cat was sitting with its paw holding down a big black rat. "It's not that I like rats at the best of times," said the cat, conversationally, as if nothing had happened. "But the rats in this place are all spies for her. She uses them as her eyes and hands. And with that, the cat let the rat go. It ran several feet, and then the cat, with one bound, was upon it, batting it hard with one sharp-clawed paw, while the other paw held the rat down. "I love this bit," said the cat happily. "Want to see me do that again?" "No," said Coraline. "Why do you do it? You're torturing it." Said the cat. It let the rat go. The rat stumbled, dazed, for a few steps, and then it began to run. With a blow of its paw, the cat knocked the rat into the air and caught it in its mouth. "Stop it," said Coraline. The cat dropped the rat between its two front paws. "There are those," it said with a sigh, in tones as smooth as oiled silk, "who have suggested that the tendency of a cat to play with its prey is a merciful one. After all, it permits the occasional funny little running snack to escape from time to time. How often does your dinner get to escape?" And then it picked the rat up in its mouth and carried it off into the woods behind a tree. Coraline walked back into the house. All was quiet and empty and deserted. Even her footsteps on the carpeted floor seemed loud. Dust motes hung in a beam of sunlight. At the far end of the hall was the mirror. She could see herself walking toward the mirror, looking, reflected, a little braver than she actually felt. There was nothing else there in the mirror, just her in the corridor. A hand touched her shoulder, and she looked up. The other mother stared down at Coraline with big, black, button eyes. "Coraline, my darling," she said, "I thought we could play some games together this morning. Now you're back from your walk. Hopscotch, Happy Families, Monopoly." "You weren't in the mirror," said Coraline. The other mother smiled. "Mirrors," she said, "are never to be trusted. Now, what game shall we play?" Coraline shook her head. "I don't want to play with you," she said. "I want to go home and be with my real parents. I want you to let them go, to let us all go." The other mother shook her head very slowly. "Sharper than a serpent's tooth," she said, "is a daughter's ingratitude. Still, the proudest spirit can be broken with love." And her long white fingers waggled and caressed the air. "I have no plans to love you," said Coraline. "No matter what, you can't make me love you." "Let's talk about it," said the other mother, and she turned and walked into the lounge. Coraline followed her. The other mother sat down on the big sofa. She picked up a shopping bag from beside the sofa and took out a white rustling paper bag from inside it. She extended the hand with it to Coraline. "Would you like one?" she asked politely, expecting it to be a toffee or a butterscotch ball. Coraline looked down. The bag was half filled with large, shiny black beetles crawling over each other in their efforts to get out of the bag. "No," said Coraline, "I don't want one." "Suit yourself," said her other mother. She carefully picked out a particularly large and black beetle, pulled off its legs, which she dropped neatly into a big glass ashtray on the small table beside the sofa, and popped the beetle into her mouth. She crunched it happily. "Yum," she said, and took another. "You're sick," said Coraline. "Sick and evil and weird." "Is that any way to talk to your mother?" her other mother asked, with her mouth full of black beetles. "You aren't my mother," said Coraline. Her other mother ignored this. "Now, I think you are a little overexcited, Coraline. Perhaps this afternoon we could do a little embroidery together, or some watercolor painting, and then dinner, and then, if you have been good, you may play with the rats a little before bed, and I shall read you a story and tuck you in and kiss you good night." Her long white fingers fluttered gently like a tired butterfly, and Coraline shivered. "No," said Coraline. The other mother sat on the sofa. Her mouth was set in a line. Her lips were pursed. She popped another black beetle into her mouth, and then another, like someone with a bag of chocolate-covered raisins. Her big black button eyes stared into Coraline's hazel eyes. Her shiny black hair twined and twisted about her neck and shoulders, as if it were blowing in some wind that Coraline could not touch or feel. They stared at each other for over a minute. Then the other mother said, "Manners." She folded the white paper bag carefully so no black beetles could escape, and she placed it back in the shopping bag. Then she stood up and up and up. She seemed taller than Coraline remembered. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out, first the black door key, which she frowned at, then tossed into her shopping bag, then a tiny silver-colored key. She held it up triumphantly. "There we are," she said. "This is for you, Coraline, for your own good, because I love you, to teach you manners. Manners maketh man, after all." She pulled Coraline back into the hallway and advanced upon the mirror at the end of the hall. Then she pushed the tiny key into the fabric of the mirror, and she twisted it. It opened like a door, revealing a dark space behind it. "You may come out when you've learned some manners," said the other mother, "and when you're ready to be a loving daughter." She picked Coraline up and pushed her into the dim space behind the mirror. A fragment of beetle was sticking to her lower lip, and there was no expression at all in her black button eyes. Then she swung the mirror door closed and left Coraline in darkness. Coraline by Neil Gaiman, Chapter 7. Somewhere inside her, Coraline could feel a huge sob welling up, and then she stopped it before it came out. She took a deep breath and let it go. She put out her hands to touch the space in which she was imprisoned. It was the size of a broom closet, tall enough to stand in or to sit in, not wide or deep enough to lie down in. One wall was glass, and it felt cold to the touch. She went around the tiny room a second time, running her hands over every surface that she could reach, feeling for doorknobs or switches or concealed catches, some kind of way out, and found nothing. A spider scuttled over the back of her hand, and she choked back a shriek. But apart from the spider, she was alone in the closet in the pitch dark. And then her hand touched something that felt for all the world like somebody's cheek and lips, small and cold, and a voice whispered in her ear, "Hush and shush, say nothing, for the beldam may be listening." Coraline said nothing. She felt a cold hand touch her face, fingers running over it like the gentle beat of a moth's wings. Another voice, hesitant and so faint Coraline wondered if she were imagining it, said, "Art thou alive?" "Yes," whispered Coraline. "Poor child," said the first voice. "Who are you?" whispered Caroline. "Names, names, names," said another voice, "not far away and lost. The names are the first things to go, after the breath is gone and the beating of the heart. We keep our memories longer than our names. I still keep pictures in my mind of my governess on some May morning, carrying my hoop and stick, and the morning sun behind her, and all the tulips bobbing in the breeze. But I have forgotten the name of my governess, and of the tulips too." "I don't think tulips have names," said Coraline. "They're just tulips." "Perhaps," said the voice sadly. "But I have always thought that these tulips must have had names. They were red, and orange and red and orange and yellow, like the embers in the nursery fire of a winter's evening. I remember them." The voice sounded so sad that Coraline put out a hand to the place where the voice was coming from, and she found a cold hand, and she squeezed it tightly. Her eyes were beginning to get used to the darkness. Now Coraline saw, or imagined she saw, 3 shapes, each as faint and pale as the moon in the daytime sky. They were the shapes of children about her own size. The cold hand squeezed her hand back. "Thank you," said the voice. "Are you a girl?" asked Coraline. "Or a boy?" There was a pause. "When I was small I wore skirts and my hair was long and curled," it said doubtfully. "But now that you ask, it does seem to me that one day they took my skirts and gave me breeches and cut my hair." "'Tain't something we give a mind to," said the first of the voices. "A boy, perhaps then," continued the one whose hand she was holding. "I believe I was once a boy." And it glowed a little more brightly, and the darkness of the room behind the mirror. "What happened to you all?" asked Coraline. "How did you come here?" "She left us here," said one of the voices. "She stole our hearts, and she stole our souls, and she took our lives away, and she left us here, and she forgot about us in the dark." "You poor things," said Coraline. "How long have you been here?" "So very long a time," said a voice. "Aye, time beyond reckoning," said another voice. "I walked through the scullery door," said the voice of the one that thought it might be a boy, "and I found myself back in the parlor. But she was waiting for me. She told me she was my other mamma, but I never saw my true mamma again." "Flee," said the very first of the voices. Another girl, Coraline fancied. "Flee while there's still air in your lungs, and blood in your veins, and warmth in your heart. Flee while you still have your mind and your soul." "I'm not running away," said Coraline. "She has my parents. I came to get them back." "Ah, but she'll keep you here while the days turn to dust, and the leaves fall, and the years pass one after the next like the tick-tick-ticking of a clock." "No," said Coraline, "she won't." There was silence then in the room behind the mirror. "Peradventure," said a voice in the darkness, "if you could win your mamma and your papa back from the beldam, you could also win free our souls." "Has she taken them?" asked Coraline, shocked. "Aye, and hidden them. This is why we could not leave here when we died. She kept us and fed on us, until now we've nothing left of ourselves, only snake skins and spider husks. Find our secret hearts, young mistress." "And what will happen to you if I do?" asked Coraline. The voices said nothing. "And what is she going to do to me?" The pale figures pulsed faintly. She could imagine that they were nothing more than after images, like the glow left by a bright light in your eyes after the lights go out. "It doth not hurt," whispered one faint voice. "She will take your life, and all you are, and all you carest for, and she will leave you but nothing but mist and fog. She'll take your joy, and one day you'll awake, and your heart and your soul will have gone. A husk you'll be, a wisp you'll be, and a thing no more than a dream on waking, or a memory of something forgotten." "Hollow," whispered the third voice. "Hollow, hollow, 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 hollow." "You must flee," sighed a voice faintly. "I don't think so," said Coraline. "I tried running away, and it didn't work. She just took my parents. Can you tell me how to get out of this room?" "If we knew, then we would tell you." "Poor things," said Coraline to herself. She sat down. She took off her sweater and rolled it up and put it behind her head as a pillow. "She won't keep me in the dark forever," said Coraline. "She brought me here to play games." "Games and challenges," the cat said. "I'm not much of a challenge here in the dark." She tried to get comfortable, twisting and bending herself to fit the cramped space behind the mirror. Her stomach rumbled. She ate her last apple, taking the tiniest bites, making it last as long as she could. When she had finished, she was still hungry. Then an idea struck her, and she whispered, "When she comes to let me out, why don't you three come with me?" "We wish that we could," they sighed to her, and they're barely their voices. "But she has our hearts in our keeping. Now we belong to the dark and to the empty places. The light would shrivel us and burn." "Oh," said Coraline. She closed her eyes, which made the darkness darker, and she rested her head on the rolled-up sweater, and she went to sleep. And as she fell asleep, she thought she felt a ghost kiss her cheek tenderly, and a small voice whisper into her ear, a voice so faint it was barely there at all, a gentle wispy nothing of a voice, so hushed that Coraline could almost believe she was imagining it. "Look through the stone," it said to her, and then she slept. Coraline by Neil Gaiman, Chapter 8. The other mother looked healthier than before. There was a little blush to her cheeks, and her hair was wriggling like lazy snakes on a warm day. Her black button eyes seemed as if they had been freshly polished. She had pushed through the mirror as if she were walking through nothing more solid than water, and had stared down at Coraline. Then she had opened the door with the little silver key. She picked Coraline up just as Coraline's real mother had done when Coraline was much younger, cradling the half-sleeping child as if she were a baby. The other mother carried Coraline into the kitchen and put her down very gently upon the countertop. Coraline struggled to wake herself up, conscious only for the moment of having been cuddled and loved, and wanting more of it, then realizing where she was and who she was with. "There, my sweet Coraline," said her other mother. "I came and fetched you out of the cupboard. You just needed to be taught a lesson. But we temper our justice with mercy here. We love the sinner and we hate the sin. Now, if you will be a good child who loves her mother, be compliant and fair-spoken, you and I shall understand each other perfectly, and we shall love each other perfectly as well." Coraline scratched the sleep grit from her eyes. "There were other children in there," she said. "Old ones, from a long time ago." "Were there?" said the other mother. She was bustling between the pans and the fridge, bringing out eggs and cheeses, butter, and a slab of sliced pink bacon. "Yes," said Coraline. "There were. I think you're planning to turn me into one of them, a dead shell." Her other mother smiled gently. With one hand she cracked the eggs into a bowl. With the other she whisked them and whirled them. Then she dropped a pat of butter into a frying pan, where it hissed and fizzled and spun as she sliced thin slices of cheese. She poured the melted butter and the cheese into the egg mixture and whisked it some more. "Now I think you're being silly, dear," said the other mother. "I love you. I will always love you. Nobody sensible believes in ghosts anyway. That's because they're all such liars. Smell the lovely breakfast I'm making for you." She poured the yellow mixture into the pan. "Cheese omelet, your favorite." Coraline's mouth watered. "You like games," she said. "That's what I've been told." The other mother's black eyes flashed. "Everybody likes games," was all she said. "Yes," said Coraline. She climbed down from the counter and sat at the table. The bacon was sizzling and spitting under the grill. It smelled wonderful. "Wouldn't you be happier if you won me, fair and square?" asked Coraline. "Possibly," said the other mother. She had a show of unconcernedness, but her fingers twitched and drummed, and she licked her lips with her scarlet tongue. "What exactly are you offering?" "Me," said Coraline, and she gripped her knees under the table to stop them from shaking. "If I lose, I'll stay here with you forever, and I'll let you love me. I'll be a most dutiful daughter. I'll eat your food and play happy families, and I'll let you sew your buttons into my eyes." Her other mother stared at her, black buttons unblinking. "That sounds very fine," she said. "And if you do not lose?" "Then you let me go. You let everyone go. My real father and mother, the dead children, everyone you've trapped here." The other mother took the bacon from under the grill and put it on a plate. Then she slipped the cheese omelet from the pan onto the plate, flipping it as she did so, letting it fold itself into a perfect omelet shape. She placed the breakfast plate in front of Coraline, along with a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice and a mug of frothy hot chocolate. "Yes," she said, "I think I like this game. But what kind of game shall it be? A riddle game? A test of knowledge or skill?" "An exploring game," suggested Coraline. "A finding things game." "And what is it that you think you should be finding in this hide-and-go-seek game, Coraline Jones?" Coraline hesitated. Then, "My parents," said Coraline, "and the souls of the children behind the mirror." The other mother smiled at this triumphantly, and Coraline wondered if she had made the right choice. Still, it was too late to change her mind now. "A deal," said the other mother. "Now eat up your breakfast, my sweet. Don't worry, it won't hurt you." Coraline stared at the breakfast, hating herself for giving in so easily, but she was starving. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" asked Coraline. "I swear it," said the other mother. I swear it on my own mother's grave. Does she have a grave? Asked Coraline. Oh, yes, said the other mother. I put her in there myself, and when I found her trying to crawl out, I put her back. Swear on something else, so I can trust you to keep your word. My right hand, said the other mother, holding it up. She waggled the long fingers slowly, displaying the claw-like nails. I swear on that. Coraline shrugged. Okay, she said. It's a deal. She ate the breakfast, trying not to wolf it down. She was hungrier than she had thought. As she ate, her other mother stared at her. It was hard to read expressions into those black button eyes, but Coraline thought that her other mother looked hungry too. She drank the orange juice, but even though she knew she would like it, she could not bring herself to taste the hot chocolate. Where should I start looking? Asked Coraline. Where you wish, said her other mother, as if she did not care at all. Coraline looked at her, and Coraline thought hard. There was no point, she decided, in exploring the garden and the grounds. They didn't exist. They weren't real. There was no abandoned tennis court in the other mother's world, no bottomless well. All that was real was the house itself. She looked around the kitchen. She opened the oven, peered into the freezer, poked into the salad compartment of the fridge. The other mother followed her about, looking at Coraline with a smirk always hovering at the edge of her lips. How big are souls, anyway? Asked Coraline. The other mother sat down at the kitchen table and leaned back against the wall, saying nothing. She picked at her teeth with a long, crimson-varnished fingernail. Then she tapped the finger gently, tap, 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 against the polished black surface of her black button eyes. Fine, said Coraline. Don't tell me. I don't care. It doesn't matter if you help me or not. Everyone knows that a soul is the same size as a beach ball. She was hoping the other mother would say something like, Nonsense. They're the size of ripe onions, or suitcases, or grandfather clocks. But the other mother simply smiled, and the tap, tap, tapping of her fingernail against her eye was as steady and relentless as the drip of water droplets from the faucet into the sink. And then Coraline realized it was simply the noise of the water, and she was alone in the room. Coraline shivered. She preferred the other mother to have a location. If she were nowhere, then she could be anywhere. And after all, it is always easier to be afraid of something you cannot see. She put her hands into her pockets, and her fingers closed around the reassuring shape of the stone with the hole in it. She pulled it out of her pocket, held it in front of her as if she were holding a gun, and walked out into the hall. was no sound but the tap, tap of the water dripping into the metal sink. She glanced at the mirror at the end of the hall. For a moment it clouded over, and it seemed to her that faces swam in the glass, indistinct and shapeless, and then the faces were gone, and there was nothing in the mirror but a girl who was small for her age, holding something that glowed gently like a green coal. Coraline looked down at her hand, surprised. It was just a stone with a hole in it, a nondescript brown pebble. Then she looked back into the mirror where the stone glimmered like an emerald. A trail of green fire flew from the pebble in the mirror and drifted toward Coraline's bedroom. Said Coraline. She walked into the bedroom. The toys fluttered excitedly as she walked in, as if they were pleased to see her. And a little tank rolled out of the toy box to greet her, its tread rolling over several other toys. It fell from the toy box onto the floor, tipping as it fell, and it lay on the carpet like a beetle on its back, crumbling and grinding its treads, before Coraline picked it up and turned it over. The tank fled under the bed in embarrassment. Coraline looked around the room. She looked in the cupboards and the drawers. Then she picked up one end of the toy box and tipped all the toys in it onto the carpet, where they grumbled and stretched and wiggled awkwardly free of each other. A gray marble rolled across the floor and clicked against the wall. None of the toys looked particularly soul-like, she thought. She picked up and examined a silver charm bracelet from which hung tiny animal charms that chased each other around the perimeter of the bracelet. The fox never catching the rabbit, the bear never gaining on the fox. Coraline opened her hand and looked at the stone hole in it, hoping for a clue, but not finding one. Most of the toys that had been in the toy box had now crawled away to hide under the bed, and the few toys that were left, a green plastic soldier, the glass marble, a vivid pink yo-yo, and such, were the kind of things you find in the bottoms of toy boxes in the real world. Forgotten objects, abandoned and unloved. She was about to leave and look elsewhere. And then she remembered a voice in the darkness, a gentle whispering voice, and what it had told her to do. She raised the stone with the hole in it and held it in front of her right eye. She closed her left eye and looked at the room through the hole in the stone. Through the stone, the world was gray and colorless, like a pencil drawing. Everything in it was gray. No, not quite everything. Something glinted on the floor. Something the color of an ember in a nursery fireplace. The color of a scarlet and orange tulip nodding in the May sun. Coraline reached out her left hand, scared that if she took her eye off it, it would vanish, and she fumbled for the burning thing. Her fingers closed about something smooth and cool. She snatched it up and then lowered the stone with the hole in it from her eye and looked down. glass marble from the bottom of the toy box sat dully in the pink palm of her hand. She raised the stone to her eye once more and looked through it at the marble. Once again, the marble burned and flickered with a red fire. A voice whispered in her mind, "Indeed, lady, it comes to me that I certainly was a boy. Now I do think on it. Oh, but you must hurry. There are still 2 of us left to find, and the beldam is already angry with you for uncovering me." If I'm going to do this, thought Coraline, I'm not going to do it in her clothes. She changed back into her pajamas and her dressing gown and her slippers, leaving the gray sweater and the black jeans neatly folded up on the bed, the orange boots on the floor by the toy box. She put the marble into her dressing gown pocket and walked out into the hall. Something stung her face and hands like sand blowing on a beach on a windy day. She covered her eyes and pushed forward. The sand stings got worse, and it got harder and harder to walk, as if she were pushing into the wind on a particularly blustery day. It was a vicious wind, and a cold one. She took a step backwards, the way she had come. "Oh, keep going," whispered a voice in her ear, "for the beldam is angry." She stepped forward in the hallway, into another gust of wind, which stung her cheeks and face with invisible sand, sharp as needles, sharp as glass. "Play fair," shouted Coraline into the wind. There was no reply, but the wind whipped about her one more time, petulantly, and then it dropped away and was gone. As she passed the kitchen, Coraline could hear, in the sudden silence, the drip, drip of the water from the leaking tap, or perhaps the other mother's long fingernails tapping impatiently against the table. Coraline resisted the urge to look. In a couple of strides, she reached the front door. Then she walked outside. Coraline went down the steps and around the house until she reached the other Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's flat. The lamps around the door were flickering on and off almost randomly now, spelling out no words that Coraline could understand. The door was closed. She was afraid it was locked, and she pushed on it with all her strength. First it stuck, then suddenly it gave, and with a jerk, Coraline stumbled into the dark room beyond. Coraline closed one hand around the stone with the hole in it and walked forward into the blackness. She expected to find a curtained anteroom, but there was nothing there. The room was dark. The theater was empty. She moved ahead cautiously. Something rustled above her. She looked up into a deeper darkness, and as she did so, her feet knocked against something. She reached down, picked up a flashlight, and clicked it on. sweeping the beam around the room. The theater was derelict and abandoned. Chairs were broken on the floor, and old dusty spiderwebs draped the walls and hung from the rotten wood and the decomposing velvet hangings. Something rustled once again. Coraline directed her light beam upward toward the ceiling. There were things up there, hairless, jellyish. She thought they might once have had faces, might even once have been dogs. But no dogs had wings like bats, or could hang like spiders, like bats, upside down. The light startled the creatures, and one of them took to the air, its wings whirring heavily through the dust. Coraline ducked as it swooped close to her. It came to rest on a far wall, and it began to clamber upside down back to the nest of the dog bats upon the ceiling. Coraline raised the stone to her eye, and she scanned the room through it, looking for something that glowed or glinted, a telltale sign that somewhere in this room was another hidden soul. She ran the beam of the flashlight about the room as she searched, the thick dust in the air making the light beam seem almost solid. There was something up on the back wall behind the ruined stage. It was grayish white, twice the size of Coraline herself, and it was stuck to the back wall like a slug. Coraline took a deep breath. "I'm not afraid," she told herself. "I'm not." She did not believe herself, but she scrambled up onto the old stage, fingers sinking into the rotting wood as she pulled herself up. As she got closer to the thing on the wall, she saw that it was some kind of a sack, like a spider's egg case. It twitched in the light beam. Inside the sack was something that looked like a person, but a person with two heads, with twice as many arms and legs as it should have. The creature in the sack seemed horribly unformed and unfinished, as if two plasticine people had been warmed and rolled together, squashed and pressed into one thing. Coraline hesitated. She did not want to approach the thing. The dog bats dropped one by one from the ceiling and began to circle the room, coming close to her but never touching her. Perhaps there are no souls hidden in here, she thought. Perhaps I can just leave and go somewhere else. She took a last look through the hole in the stone. The abandoned theater was still a bleak gray, but now there was a brown glow as rich and bright as polished cherry wood coming from inside the sack. Whatever was glowing was being held in one of the hands of the thing on the wall. Coraline walked slowly across the damp stage, trying to make as little noise as she could, afraid that, if she disturbed the thing in the sack, it would open its eyes and see her, and then but there was nothing that she could think of as scary as having it look at her. Her heart pounded in her chest. She took another step forward. She had never been so scared, but she still walked forward until she reached the sack. Then she pushed her hand into the sticky, clinging whiteness of the stuff on the wall. It crackled softly, like a tiny fire, as she pushed, and it clung to her skin and clothes like a spider web clings, like white cotton candy. She pushed her hand into it, and she reached upward until she touched a cold hand, which was, she could feel, closed around another glass marble. The creature's skin felt slippery, as if it had been covered in jelly. Coraline tugged at the marble. At first, nothing happened. It was held tight in the creature's grasp. Then, one by one, the fingers loosened their grip, and the marble slipped into her hand. She pulled her arm back through the sticky webbing, relieved that the thing's eyes had not opened. She shone the light on its faces. They resembled, she decided, the younger versions of Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, but twisted and squeezed together like two lumps of wax that had melted and melded together into one ghastly thing. Without warning, one of the creature's hands made a grab for Coraline's arm. Its fingernails scraped her skin, but it was too slippery to grip, and Coraline pulled away successfully. And then the eyes opened. 4 black buttons glinting and staring down at her, and 2 voices that sounded like no voice that Coraline had ever heard began to speak to her. One of them wailed and whispered, the other buzzed like a fat and angry bluebottle at a window pane. But the voices said, as one person, "Thief, give it back. Stop, thief." The air became alive with dog bats. Coraline began to back away. She realized then that, terrifying though the thing on the wall that had once been the other Mrs. Spink and Forcible was, it was attached to the wall by its web, encased in its cocoon. It could not follow her. The dog bats flapped and fluttered about her, but they did nothing to hurt Coraline. She climbed down from the stage, shone the flashlight about the old theater, looking for the way out. "Flee, miss," wailed a girl's voice in her head. "Flee now. You have 2 of us. Flee this place while your blood still flows." Coraline dropped the marble into her pocket beside the other. She spotted the door, ran to it, and pulled on it until it opened.